Assalamu alaikum, brothers. Jordan Peterson. He is a guy who has been a sensation in the West, especially when arguing against some of the radical feminists and the right for pronouns. A lot of Muslims, due to his arguments and his way of arguing, have taken a liking to him. But in a recent discussion with Muhammad Hijab, a lot of Muslims realized something about Jordan Peterson. His view on the world and God is problematic, and I want to look into that more in depth.
So I went and read all the policies. Well, one of the policies was that if you didn't use the preferred pronouns of a given group, that you could be charged essentially with a hate crime. And I thought, no,
Which
that's
given group is that? You're talking about transgender people.
Yeah, and so there's all these pronouns that have come up. There's 70 different sets of pronouns approximately to hypothetically describe people who don't fit anywhere on the gender spectrum, which is also something that I don't really understand. I don't understand that conceptually.
We'll come to that. But I just want to hear the story of this bill first.
Okay, so now a person is compelled under Canadian law to use the pronoun of another individual's choice on pain of law. And I thought, well, no, that's not acceptable. It's one thing to put limits on what a person can't say, like say with hate speech laws, which I also don't agree with, by the way, but that's a different argument. I think it's a narrower argument. But to compel me to use a certain content when I'm formulating my thoughts or my actions under threat of legislative action, I thought, no, what's happened there is the government has introduced compelled speech legislation into the private sphere. It's never happened in the history of English common law. And so I said, there's no way I'm abiding by that. I don't care what your damn rationale is. We're compassionate. It's like, no, you're not. No, you're not. You're playing this radical collectivist left-wing game. You're trying to gain linguistic supremacy in the area of public discourse. You're doing that using compassion as a guise, and you're pulling the wool over people's eyes. And you're not going to do it with me.
If I was sitting here in front of you as a transgendered male to female or female to male, and we began the conversation. At the beginning of the conversation, you stumbled and called me he or she, and I was perhaps identifying the other way around. And then if I'd said to you, please, I'd rather go by she, how would you respond to that on a personal level? How would you?
Well, it would depend on the situation, but the way I have responded to that, because I've had a number of conversations with transgendered individuals, is that I use whatever pronoun seems to go along with the persona that they're projecting publicly. It's the simplest thing to do.
Jordan Peterson basically, when he is talking against these radical feminists, when he is talking against these pronoun warriors, he exactly knows what reality is. They're not some fundamental question, I guess. So, you can see these clips where he affirms these questions. What are pronouns? He knows. What is a woman? What is a female? He knows. What is a man? He knows. But when we ask him, do you believe in God? He says that do believe. We need to ask, what do you mean? As these are fundamental, and if you're going down to that fundamental level of God, then we need to ask even these questions.
So people say to me, do you believe in God? And I think, okay, there's a couple of mysteries in that question. What do you mean do? What do you mean you? What do you mean believe? And what do you mean God? And you say as the questioner, well, we already know what all those things mean, except belief in God. And I think, no, if we're going to get down to the fundamental brass tacks, we don't really know what any of those things mean. And so for me, belief, for example, is often reflected not so much in proposition as it is in action. If I want to know what you believe, I could ask you, and hopefully you have some idea about what you believe.
To most people, this sounded absurd, and it truly is. But what I want to point out is that it is a misunderstanding that God is something that is only fundamental. So, for example, what Jordan Peterson is saying that when we are going to the base of our reality, which is God, he is taking a somewhat of a metaphysical approach or an ontological approach, the first principle or the first cause of all existence. And if we are going to that cause, we should question everything. or you can say the fundamental substance, and for him that would be God. But you see, for Muslims, God isn't only the fundamental cause, but rather God is just as obvious as how a man is a man and a woman is woman. So for Jordan, for him to affirm that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, it is absurd for him to say that God is just as fundamental, or God is not as fundamental, or God is not as obvious. And this is where, Muslims have somewhat differed. And the approach that I am telling you about, as God as being something that is very apparent. He is as apparent as the day. As Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah says, how you seek the evidence of the one God, who is the evidence for everything. Nothing is true in the mind if the day needs evidence. So you are asking, meaning Jordan Peterson, what do you mean by do? What do I mean by believe? As if God isn't something obvious. So there's an inconsistency on his part. He's saying that it is fundamental, basically, and not obvious. But when he talks about gender, feminism, radicalism, he knows what he's talking about. Because, well, for him, there would be something that are obvious. But here, he is saying that they're fundamental and should be questioned. But no, God is more clear and more obvious than the bright sun and the morning day. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.